When it comes to the 70th anniversary of World War II, most have turned their attention to Japan and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. However, in recent years, China has steadily reasserted itself in the region, mirroring several tactics employed by Japan prior to World War II, leading some analysts like Curtis S. Chin, who on this very podcast asked the question, is New China the old Japan? So, as we come upon this August 15th, what exactly are we seeing with China, and what impact could Beijing's activities have on the region? Recently, I kicked off a conversation with Scott Harold, Deputy Director at the Center for Asia-Pacific Policy at the RAND Corporation. I began our conversation by asking him if we'll see a change in China's tactics in the disputed waters.
I think any change that we've seen with respect to China's approach to the East China Sea conflict over the Senkakus, or rather China's claim to the Senkakus, is purely tactical. We have not seen anything from Beijing that suggests that they've decided that this is no longer a claim or that their approach was wrong, at least not explicitly, even though their approach has clearly failed to force Japan to admit that China's claims have any validity such that they would merit international or bilateral negotiations. I think what we have seen, however, is that China's priority has been to try to claim the South China Sea. And the artificial island building campaign is the most stark evidence of that. Also, frankly, if you claim the East China Sea, it does not give you the South China Sea. However, if you're able to lay claim to the South China Sea, it probably puts you in a good position to put a lot of additional pressure on Japan and other countries up to the northeast like South Korea, and frankly even the U.S. and then to the west, India. So I think the Chinese strategy has been pretty clear, or at least has some obvious merits to it if you're sitting in Beijing. But I don't think that we've seen anything strategic or substantive in the way of a rethink or a recognition that their approach to dealing with their desire to claim the Senkakus was wrong or needs a rethink.
Speaking of the South China Sea, it's widely expected that the Court of Arbitration in The Hague will decide relatively soon whether or not it has the jurisdiction to hear the Philippines case. Now, as we have discussed many times before, China hasn't participated in any of the proceedings thus far, and if the case does move forward, if the Court of Arbitration decides it does have jurisdiction, what do you think China's reaction will be?
I'm sure that if the court finds that it has standing to evaluate the Philippines filing, then China will claim again, I'm sure, and loudly, that it does not recognize and will not abide by any such filing or the rulings on any such filing. I would expect an even more full-throated press to try to delegitimate any findings by claiming that the court was biased or that China's non-participation meant that the court didn't have a full perspective on the issue and therefore it cannot legitimately be seen to have reached a fair decision. But I think at the end of the day, if the court goes all the way through, finds that it has standing to make a ruling, and then makes a ruling that's unfavorable to China, I suspect the Chinese will probably deny that has any standing and will proceed as if it does not and put themselves on the outside of international law on this issue. And that will probably further damage China's regional and global standing. But on this issue, I suspect the Chinese leadership has already factored that into their decision-making. So I don't think that international condemnation or opprobrium alone are going to resolve the issue or call China back to its senses, as it were, which I think is part of the reason why none of the countries in the region are relying on norms or international law alone, but are instead doing more and more things in the realm of joint buy and try and even multilateral exercises, conducting freedom of navigation operations, and generally doing everything they can to signal to Beijing that the costs for its chosen approach to resolving or handling its its disputed claims is going to carry with it substantial costs and not be something that China can do and get away with low costs.
Well, speaking of drills, China has recently said that the United States drills in the region are escalating tensions, but even China participated in the most recent RIMPAC naval exercises. I mean, is there any validity to China's statements? I mean, are we seeing collectively more drills, either in quantity or in scale, that are raising tensions?
I think we are seeing more bilateral exercises, although I have not actually counted the numbers and compared them to last year. But certainly my impression is that the U.S. has been one of many countries that has been more active in the South China Sea, undertaking things like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief exercises, at-sea search and rescue exercises, counter-piracy exercises and actual counter-piracy activities, and that this is part of a broad region-wide consensus that this is appropriate, these are international waters, and that these kinds of exercises help build regional cooperation. Now, the one thing that they don't do is cast any legitimacy or favorable light on a country's unilateral expansive claims, such as China's. So from China's perspective, one can easily understand why they would say that these are unhelpful exercises that might be raising tensions. Yes, they are. They are preventing China from simply building islands and forcing everyone else to recognize that might equals right in this case. But from everyone else's perspective, I have yet to hear anyone in the Philippines, Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Japan, or even Taiwan state that what is happening in the region is an escalation of tensions driven by humanitarian assistance and disaster relief exercises of a multilateral nature led by the United States.
And one last question. We have the BRICS Bank. We have the AIIB. Are we seeing China trying to reclaim the power, maybe some of its gravitas that it had prior to its defeat in the first Sino-Japanese War? What do you think we're likely to see in the future?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to remember that in the period prior to the defeat of the Manchu Qing Empire by the Japanese Empire in the late 19th century, China did not exercise influence as such. The Manchu Empire exercised influence, and it did not exercise influence in a substantial way over the South China Sea, over Australia or Indonesia, over large swaths of Central or South Asia. So the notion that China might be returning to something that it enjoyed, a position of privilege that it enjoyed 120 years ago is simply not correct. Remember, at that time, China was actually a colony of the Manchus. It was not, in and of itself, ruled by ethnically Han Chinese people. Moreover, I don't think that we have yet seen China's AIIB initiative or its One Belt, One Road or BRICS Bank initiatives leading it to a position where countries say, you know what, Beijing has a better way of doing things. We feel comfortable with the way it does things. We like its leadership. It provides visionary and inspired values, and it protects our interests, and it binds itself and limits its actions in ways that we feel more secure as a consequence of. I just don't think that Beijing or China more broadly is ready to step into that kind of a leadership role. And absent that, I think you're going to see continued demand signals for multilateral cooperation with strong U.S. presence and a strong U.S. component of leadership that provides the same kind of regional stability and frankly, promotion of liberal democratic values that the region has largely reached a consensus on and has for decades now. And I don't think I see that changing in the near to midterm.
Scott Harold with the RAND Corporation, thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely, Steve.
Again, I'd like to thank Scott Harold with the RAND Corporation for joining me this week on the podcast. But now I'd like to hear from you. What's your opinion of China's actions? What do you think Beijing's next move will be?